Hey everyone, Mr. Wineland here. We are going to go over Warring City-States, Section 2. We're going to break it up into two parts. We're going to talk about the different city-states in this video, and then we'll talk about the Persian War in the next video. Um, so let's kind of talk about city-states. So Greece, like I said, it wasn't like, hey, we're all Greeks, like in Oklahoma, you were all Oklahomans, doesn't matter if you're from Tulsa, Manford, Stillwater. Yes, you have your own little community, but we're all together Oklahomans. That's what unifies us. But back then in Greece, they didn't view themselves as Greeks. They were all in their own little polis or city state, basically. And so your definition's right here. Uh, the society was centered on around a city state, developed independently with its own form of customs. Uh, so, so basically, you would want to write that. So this probably I'm about to highlight it here. Everything in yellow right there. You probably want to write if you want to pause here, but each polis was its own independent thing. It's kind of like in Oklahoma today. If we weren't all Oklahomans, it would be like you're citizens of Manford. I'm a citizen from Stillwater because that's where I live. So it's going to be based on where you live. So polis was the center of the daily life culture. Greeks were fiercely loyal to their polis, to their people. They did not think of themselves as Greeks, but as more of residents of that city state. So again, it's the Athenians, the Spartans, Corinthians. So that's how they viewed each other mostly. Agora is right down here, by the way. If you want to define that, there in yellow. The polis was built around a high area known as the Acropolis. Acropolis was a fort, had military purpose, but it also included temples for gods, ceremonial spaces for the public, and also it had what is called an agora, which is today's marketplace. So it's kind of like instead of let's go to the mall, let's go to the agora, and we would go shopping and discuss politics and let's just gossip. That's what they would do. Let's just gossip. So anyway, that was kind of their viewpoint back then. If let's go to the agora, you would have the shopping place. That's where people go to socialize, talk, share ideas. So you'd have a lot of shops, houses, temples in the agora, gymnasiums, athletics for training grounds, public bath. Yes, they had public baths. Sturdy wall for defense around the polis. So you had different types of communities. Each polis was different, how they ran things. If you were in Corinth, you were an oligarchy ruled by a few individuals. Athens, this would be the birthplace of democracy, and Sparta was a more of a mighty city-state, basically your more typical Greek city-state. A lot of tyrants had seized power around this time in many city-states. You saw a lot of clashes with rulers and common people. Powerful individuals sometimes seized the control of the government, appealing to the most common people for support, called tyrants. Unlike today, tyrants generally were not considered harsh and cruel, looked upon as leaders who would work for interests of the ordinary people. Once in power, for example, tyrants often would set up building programs, provide jobs, housing, and for their supporters. They weren't like really cruel, but they obtain a lot of the power. They did kind of upset the common people at times. Athens was kind of the place for democracy. They kind of built this stable government. It is the first form of government democracy. Now, it's not like our democracy. We have a republic where we have a lot more people involved. Theirs is a little bit more of a direct democracy. So Athens is the birthplace of democracy, but it's not always democratic. So it was first ruled by kings, later ruled by aristocrats, very wealthy elite individuals. Most Athenians were poor, had little power over their own lives. There's a big gap between rich and poor, which drew conflict. Then there was an official named Draco who reformed the laws. And Draco comes in and he kind of helps with this unrest because there's a lot of people upset. I'm not getting paid enough money, and this person's getting paid more than me. Blah, 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 blah. Draco comes in, he kind of brings down the law a little bit harsher, but helps to break disputes and clashes. Then in 590 BC, lawmaker Solon revised laws again, overturned a lot of Draco's harshest laws. Because at this time, Solon's like, hey, we don't need all these harsh laws. Not that we need some, but we don't need all of these. So he outlawed debt slavery, which is a good thing. We don't want that. tried to reduce poverty by encouraging trade, allowed the Athenian men to take part in assembly that governed city and serve on juries, and wealthy men could run and hold political office. So that opened up the door for democracy. So Solon's laws relived tension for a time, did not resolve it. Tensions did flare up again after a few decades. By 541 BC, politician Peisistratus, took advantage of the conflict and seized power. He became a tyrant and claimed rule over the people. He was a very violent person. People liked the fact that he did, however, though, even though he was a violent person, did punish the aristocrats. Kind of took out the elitists, helped the poor a little bit. So that's good. That's good. So anyway, Cleisthenes would come in and took over Athens, and they reformed the stage and the Athenian democracy. And Cleisthenes, which is answer number 5, broke up a power of noble families, divided Athens actually into 10 tribes based on where people lived, made the tribes, not families, social groups basis for the election, and each tribe was elected 50 men to serve on a council of 500 and proposed laws, and each tribe elected one general Athenian army. So it's not too bad, not too bad. So we see the nature of the Athenian democracy as a democracy. Athenians were ruled by the people, but not all the people. Look, they were pretty limited on who could be represented. Only about 10% of the population was represented in the democracy. Only free male Athenians over the age of 20 had completed military training, were allowed to vote. Women, immigrants, children, slaves had no role in the government at all. So it's not like it's more of a direct democracy, and unfortunately, you don't see everybody get to be represented. We do see the Athenian government. It did allow those who were allowed to take part. They were expected to vote in all elections, serve in office if elected, serve on juries, serve military during the war. Athenian democracy consisted of 3 main bodies: assembly, council of 500, the courts. Kind of similar to what we have. We have the 3 branches of government. They kind of had their 3 bodies of government. You see some similarities between the Congress and the executive branch in all of these. A little bit of the Supreme Court, not much. Assembly included everyone eligible to serve in the government, so present to vote on laws, all important decisions. This is where the direct democracy comes in. We see the Council of 500 was created by Cleisthenes, wrote the laws to be vetoed on full assembly. Then we see complex series of courts. Members could number up to 6,000, chosen from the assembly, heard trials, sentenced criminals. So we kind of have a little bit of the court system here, kind of like Supreme Court. Most governing was done by the assembly. Some elected officials had special roles who would run the certain aspects of the government. Among elected officials, generals led the city in war. Another elected official was the archon. The archon was kind of like acted as both the assembly and the council of 500. The archon was elected for 1 term, but could be reelected many times, kind of like a president in some ways. Public servant who could be removed from office, punished if he failed to serve the people well. So, kind of sort of like the president. As far as Sparta, they were not like Athens. They located on the Peloponnesus, a large peninsula of the southern Greece. So Greece is kind of a little split up a little bit. You have the southern part of it, which they were a part of. First, surrounded by smaller towns, over time Sparta seized control of others. We see they were conquering towns of Messenia. And the Spartans made the Messenians into helots, which were basically slaves. They worked for them. Helots were the state slaves given to the Spartan citizens to work farms. So citizens did not have to perform the manual labor. They let the helots deal with that, as the Spartan citizens would spend their time training for war. Now, Spartans emphasized on war not due to fondness for fighting, but as a way to keep order in society. But eventually also to help protect their society. But the biggest reason of why they really put emphasis on training is because the Helots outnumbered the Spartans eventually 7-1. That's a pretty big margin. So to keep the Helots in check, or to keep in check the Helots in check by a strong army, they had to train for war, and the Spartans had to be ready for any time a Helot revolt. But most of the time, Helots were like, "Yeah, we're gonna mess with these guys." So they were. Sparta was more of a militaristic state to that of Athens, that was a democracy. Spartans demanded a lot of strength and toughness. You got to be tough. All babies were examined at birth. Any unhealthy child were left in the wild to die, which is very sad. I mean, if there was some sort of an ailment or some sort of an illness, that baby sadly would not be cared to health or taken care of. They would just be like, sorry, you're not strong enough, and they would send you out to the wild. Pretty sad. Boys taught physical and mental toughness by their mothers at age 7, when their mothers were like, okay, you're ready to get, be taught more stuff. They entered combat school and toughened their hardships of being a soldier. Um, Basically, at some point, these individuals, these boys, would have like a test where they would be sent out the wild to survive, and if they didn't come back, and they just died, it was like, okay, they weren't strong enough. So a lot of times that happened, and they were not welcome to be a soldier because they're dead. But mostly, if they came back, they'd become a soldier. And at the age of 20, boys became hoplites. Foot soldiers remained in the army for 10 years before becoming a citizen. Unusual among Greek city-states, we see women played an important role, trained in gymnastics for physical fitness to bear strong children. Women had the right to own property, unlike women in most of Greece. So Sparta women had a little bit more of a power. But like I said, Sparta was a militaristic state. So you're answer number 6. Sparta was led by 2 kings who served in the military commanders. Decision making was largely left to the elected council of elders. So there's the difference between the two city states. Sparta and Athens were not big fans of each other, but eventually they are going to come together to fight the Persians, which is going to be what we're going to talk about next in part 2. So I'll see you in part 2 as we talk about the warring city states.